A good example of that happening recently was when President Trump en masse pardoned more than 1,500 convicted felons who were Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, rioters, insurrectionists who assaulted 150 police officers right here on the Capitol campus. And departing from the traditional process of examining each case individually, which is what the Department of Justice has done in the pardon office, he just pardoned all of them. So he didn't look to see which ones had been convicted before of domestic violence, armed robbery, other forms of felony crimes. Some of them had no criminal records. Some of them had serious violent criminal records. All of them were released. And what do you know? Dozens of them have since reoffended since that terrible process took place. One guy recently, Andrew Paul Johnson in Georgia, was released by Donald Trump, pardoned by him, got out of jail, and went and sexually assaulted two 12-year-olds. And when they and their families were about to go to the police to report the crimes, he said, well, I'm about to get millions of dollars from Donald Trump because I'm a J6er. I'll split the money with you if you don't go in. Thankfully, they went and they reported him to the police. He was prosecuted. He was just sentenced to life in prison. But those two kids' lives are irrevocably altered.
That just happened on the floor of the United States Congress during National Police Week. Republicans spent the week pretending to protect the public, passing bills they call tough on crime. And Jamie Raskin just walked up to their podium and lit the whole performance on fire. Andrew Paul Johnson, pardoned by Donald Trump, free because of a mass clemency that bypassed every single safeguard this country has ever built. And what did he do with his freedom? He sexually assaulted two children. If you think that's outrageous, hit subscribe, because this floor fight goes much, much deeper. Share this with everyone who still thinks Republicans own public safety.
I yield myself such time as I may consume.
The gentleman from Maryland is recognized.
I rise today in strong opposition to the Keeping Violent Offenders Off of Our Streets Act, which is a truly strange bill. The bill, first of all, refers to violent offenders, but it's unclear exactly why. It applies to all offenders. But in any event, it would redefine the business of insurance to include the posting of monetary bail, criminal bail bonds, and federal immigration bail bonds. It would accomplish this dramatic reclassification for the purposes of prosecuting and punishing community bail funds as a form of criminal insurance fraud. Only in surreal MAGA Washington would someone think to change the definition of insurance fraud to include the posting of bail and bail bonds. I can't even begin to reconstruct the giant mental leaps that must have been used to get to this fallacy. Well, this week is National Police Week, and as we do every year, we recognize and honor the men and women who put their lives on the line for us to protect our communities. Our colleagues have vaguely and inscrutably billed this legislation as pro-police, although they have yet to show how it would support the police or address the articulated needs of police officers anywhere in the country. The true aim of H.R. 6260, apparently, is to discourage and destroy not-for-profit bail funds that raise money for people who cannot afford to pay bail for themselves. These groups try to address the basic injustice that results when wealthy people can walk free while poor people are held in jail pending trial for no reason other than their inability to pay, which is why the federal system, as I was arguing in our last bill, eliminates money from the equation entirely and says the only question is whether you present a flight risk or a danger to the community. Now, my distinguished colleague, the author of the legislation, ties the beginning of these bail funds, I think he said, to 2020 with the killing of George Floyd. Actually, the history of these funds goes back a lot further than that. It really begins during the period of abolitionism in the Civil War, when various people were being jailed for either assisting enslaved people in the Underground Railroad or being arrested for their attempts to interfere with the fugitive slave law. But in any event, money was raised to get people out of jail for those purposes. That lasted through the Civil War, and it went into the Reconstruction period as well. Because we know that the criminal justice system in the South was turned into an instrument of incarceration and domination and reimposing discipline on the freed slave population. And so that's what they were using the criminal justice system for, and so people throughout the country were raising money to try to get people out of jail, to repurchase their hard-won freedom. But this process of communities raising money to pay bail has persisted all the way through the 20th century and into the 21st century. The ACLU did it. They created a bail fund for people swept up in the Palmer raids and the Red Scare and obscenity prosecutions, for people who couldn't afford to get themselves out of jail. It was critical to Reverend Martin Luther King and the SCLC and John Lewis and the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Bail money was raised to get people out of jail for often pretextual and fraudulent arrests and incarceration throughout the South. It has continued to be used since then. It was used during the anti-Vietnam War movement, when bail money was raised to get people out of jail, again, in mass dragnet arrests without regard to what people themselves had done. It is being used today in the LGBTQ community, and it's been used, as the gentleman references, in Minneapolis, where we saw exactly what ICE was doing when they shot dead in broad daylight at point-blank range U.S. citizens, Renee Good and Alex Preddy. So if they're willing to kill people, they're certainly willing to rough them up, beat them up, and arrest them falsely. And yes, the people of Minneapolis, to their great credit, came together to create funds to bail people out of jail when they were mistreated by the police. So, should we twist the law of insurance fraud into unrecognizable knots in order to deter and destroy bail funds and to threaten people with felony convictions, like people who go out and sell fraudulent insurance policies? It's hard to see why we should do that. And by the way, it's not just those that you would put on the liberal or progressive side of civil movements in American history, because the exact same thing happens with anti-abortion protesters, with the pro-life movement. You better check with the pro-life movement before you vote for this legislation, because they could get swept up in it too. They've raised a lot of money for people who are willing to put themselves in the way of a women's reproductive clinic, a health clinic. They consider those killing places. Obviously, we have a profound disagreement about that. We believe the people have a constitutional right to their own health care, but in any event, set that aside. These people are sincerely motivated in what they're doing, and yes, they've raised money to bail people out of jail when they get arrested for blockading abortion clinics. Now, should we describe that as a form of insurance fraud so it can be regulated, and then if somebody misstates something on a form or on a bail statement, they don't properly record it or whatever, suddenly the whole Orwellian dragnet of the federal government can come down on them? And by the way, what's the federal interest in this anyway? I mean, that's very hard to see. The original law creating a federal crime around interstate insurance fraud was all based on the idea that the insurance has an interstate nexus because it's being sold across state lines. But the vast majority of protests take place in one town, in one city. Where is the interstate nexus that would even give us jurisdiction to adopt this dramatic expansion of the law governing insurance fraud? I would love the distinguished gentleman from Wisconsin to illuminate where is the interstate nexus or character that justifies this dramatic enlargement of law governing insurance fraud in the United States. So I understand that for some reason inscrutable to me, they want to target basically the federal system of bail during police week. I don't see what the connection is, but in any event, this is a step way too far. I was willing to go with the Attorney General report. Out of deference to my friends, we will support the Attorney General report so we can get a clearer picture of what's going on. But to change insurance fraud law and policy in America to target, when you think about it, a really noble and honorable practice used by both people on the left, people on the right, people in between, to support those who either deliberately engage in civil disobedience or are falsely targeted by the police, strikes me as a very bizarre thing to do in a strange way to honor Law Enforcement Week. I reserve.
Let's slow down and make sure you understand exactly what just happened on the House floor, because Republicans will not explain this to you. H.R. 6260 does not ban violent offenders from getting bail. It does not strengthen sentencing. It does not fund a single cop. What it does is reclassify community bail funds, nonprofits, churches, neighbors pooling money to help someone who can't afford $500 as entities engaged in the business of insurance. And if they make a mistake on a form, they can be prosecuted for federal insurance fraud. Meanwhile, the for-profit bail bond industry, a billion-dollar machine that charges 10 to 15% of bail just to hand you money and pockets every cent, whether you're innocent or not, faces zero new scrutiny. Not one word of this legislation touches the commercial bail bondsman. Not one. Because the commercial bail bondsmen are a major political donor class. They lobbied heavily against every cashless bail reform across the country. They fund campaigns. And now Congress is returning the favor by destroying their only competition, the nonprofit funds that help poor people do what rich people can do automatically, walk out of a jail cell while presumed innocent. Raskin also dropped a constitutional bomb that Fitzgerald completely ignored. The federal crime of insurance fraud is built on an interstate commerce nexus, the idea that insurance crosses state lines. But most of these bail transactions happen in one city, in one courthouse, on one block. Where is the federal hook? Where is the constitutional authority? Fitzgerald never answered, because there is no good answer. He just said, "We addressed it in committee," and sat down. That's what passes for legislation during National Police Week in 2026. A bill designed by and for the bail bond industry, wrapped in a flag, and named after violent offenders who have nothing to do with what the bill actually does. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. In the federal court system, the system Congress itself controls, there is no cash bail, has not been for more than 60 years. The federal courts decide pretrial release on one question only. Are you a flight risk? Are you a danger? Your bank account is irrelevant. That is the system Republicans are now demonizing in state jurisdictions. The same system they operate in their own courts. They're attacking states for copying federal policy. Think about that for a moment. The hypocrisy isn't even hidden. It's structural.
Before he was convicted. But in the federal system, there was no bail. He was denied bail because he was clearly a flight risk and a danger to the community. Same thing with Ghislaine Maxwell. She offered to put up $30 million to get out of jail, and the federal system said, we don't do that, right? We don't release people based on money. You're a flight risk, and you are a threat to the community. And that's the only thing that should count. It shouldn't be like an auction that you go to, and whoever can put up the most money gets out of jail free, and then the poor people don't. But now they want to go beyond that to say, well, poor people can't even pool their resources and get support from people in the community or other parts of the country because that could constitute insurance fraud. So that strikes me as ridiculous. I'm going to yield 1 minute to the very distinguished gentleman from Texas, Representative Menifee.
The gentleman's recognized.
Thank you to my colleague. I want to be very clear about what this bill is. This is part of a greater effort to ensure that we have cash bail systems throughout this country, which would keep rich people on the streets, even if they're violent criminals, and would have poor people locked behind bars because they don't have the money. Picture two people accused of the same low-level, nonviolent misdemeanor, come from the same background. A judge looks at both of them and says neither is a flight risk and neither is a threat of harm to the community. But the bail is set at $1,500, and because one person can pay the $1,500, they're back on the street. The other person in jail 6 months, maybe a year, they lose their apartment, they lose their job, they maybe even lose custody of their child. That's not justice. That's a tax on people who don't have spare cash. And I know this because we experienced this in Harris County. My home county, Harris County, asked the right question and found the answer. Judges started releasing people accused of nonviolent misdemeanors before trial. And you know what happened to crime? Absolutely nothing. Pre-trial release went up 30 points from 50% in 2015 to over 80% today. Repeat offending did not go up.
I yield the gentleman an additional 30 seconds.
Gentleman's recognized.
Not even a little. And I was proud to defend that consent decree. So let's be clear about what this is. If somebody's a threat to the community, they should be in jail, regardless of whether they have $1 billion or $1,000. If they're not a threat to the community, they should not be left to languish in jail, potentially lose their livelihood, their family. Also, we can make cash bail companies more rich. We should be about protecting the community, not protecting industry. I yield back.
Harris County, Texas. Pretrial release up 30 percentage points. Crime rate unchanged. That's not opinion, that's data. The Brennan Center for Justice published a comprehensive study in 2024 and found no statistically significant relationship between cashless bail and increases in violent crime. Zero. The research is in. The results are clear. And Republicans passed a bill during Police Week anyway. Not because the facts support it, but because the bail bond industry needs protecting and an election is coming. Now let's talk about Andy Biggs and H.R. 8365, the Monitor Accountability Act, because this one deserves its own spotlight. In 2013, a federal judge determined that the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, under the leadership of Joe Arpaio, had engaged in what one expert called the worst pattern of racial profiling by a law enforcement agency in the history of the United States. Arpaio didn't just lose in court. He was found in civil contempt, then criminal contempt. Then he was finally pardoned by Donald Trump, naturally, before he could face full consequences. Because of Arpaio's years of gleeful defiance of court orders, the office has required a federal monitor ever since. Biggs's bill would impose a 5-year hard cap on all federal monitors, eliminating institutional knowledge, resetting the clock, and giving obstinate jurisdictions a simple strategy. Just run out the clock. Biggs frames this as codifying recommendations from former Attorney General Merrick Garland's 2021 memo on monitoring reform. Raskin shredded that framing alive on the floor. Garland's memo said to conduct a 5-year review to assess performance. Biggs's bill says terminate the monitor after 5 years regardless of performance. Those are not the same thing. They're not even close. And Raskin asked the question that defines the entire exchange. Why hasn't a single U.S. senator introduced companion legislation? Because serious legislation travels between chambers. Legislation that's really just a targeted hit job on one monitor in one case in one congressman's home state that stays right where it is, on the House floor, burning daylight during Police Week, going nowhere. Biggs was not building national policy. He was doing constituent services for a sheriff's department with a civil rights judgment against it. He just happened to be doing it with federal law. The through line of this entire day is this. Republicans spent National Police Week passing bills that do not fund a single officer, do not solve a single crime, and do not protect a single community. They passed a bill to protect bail bondsmen. They passed a bill to protect a sheriff's department from federal oversight for racial profiling. They passed a bill to publish a list of jurisdictions that use the same bail system that the federal courts have used for 6 decades. These are not public safety bills. These are industry protection bills dressed in a badge, and Raskin made sure the record says exactly that.
Back to the Judiciary Committee. If the Republican House rules permitted, I would have offered the motion with a very significant amendment to the bill. My amendment would bring not just rhetorical support, but real support to police officers. Specifically, the police officers who defended this chamber, this Capitol, this Congress, all the members of Congress, and the Vice President, and our democracy during the January 6th attack by creating the January 6th Law Enforcement Heroes Compensation Fund to provide compensation for any injuries inflicted on our officers that day, as well as any corresponding economic losses. More than 140 officers from the Capitol Police Force, these are people who serve with us every day. You see them every day, and you may know some of them. More than 140 of them from the Capitol Force, from the Metropolitan Police Department, and several other regional police departments, including the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland, were wounded, injured, and hospitalized as a result of the mob attack on our country, where our officers fought valiantly for hours against atrocious violence that one of the officers likened to medieval battle. Many officers were forced out of policing by the injuries inflicted on that day. Many suffered grievous physical and emotional injuries, including post-traumatic stress, for which they are still being treated and from which they may never fully recover. One of them, I know, Sergeant Gunnell, suffered a crushed right foot, a destroyed rotator cuff, and because he could barely lift his arm and he could barely walk, he was forced out of his dream job of being a Capitol officer. He became a Capitol officer because his high school class from Long Island, New York, came and visited the Capitol. And he saw what the officers were doing, and he said, one day, I'm going to do what those officers do, and I'm going to protect the Congress of the United States. And in the middle of his career, he was so disabled by the attack that he had to leave it, despite wanting to stay, but he simply no longer could live up to the physical expectations of the job. And now his family is living at a fraction of the salary that he had before. And we could tell you lots of stories like this. Some of the officers, like Officer Brian Sicknick, who died on January 7th, gave the ultimate sacrifice, the last full measure of devotion to this body. Several took their own lives after this brutal and nightmarish convulsion, an attack incited by the President of the United States as determined by the House of Representatives. Some of these people are disfigured and disabled for life, but all of them, and their politics are irrelevant. Some of them are Republicans, some are independents, some are Democrats. But all of the officers responded on January 6th like heroes, and they deserve our eternal thanks. And they deserve more than that, the actual commitment of this body to help them. The Trump administration wrote a check for nearly $5 million to the family of Ashley Babbitt, even though two separate investigations determined that our police officers acted responsibly, lawfully, and reasonably to defend this chamber and the people who work in it on that day. And yet they gave them nearly $5 million. You know what they've given to the families of the police officers injured, wounded, whose lives were irrevocably changed on that day? Zero. Nothing. It's time for us to pass this legislation and show that our commitment is real to the police officers who work with us right here every day. That's what we need to be doing, and I urge everybody to support the January 6th Law Enforcement Heroes Compensation Fund. I ask unanimous consent to insert into the record the text of this amendment, Mr. Speaker, and I hope my colleagues will join me in voting for the motion to recommit so we can move forward with this absolutely essential legislation.
0. That is the number. Not a rounding error, not a budget oversight. $0. That is what the Trump administration has given to the more than 140 police officers who were beaten, crushed, concussed, stabbed, blinded, traumatically stressed, and in some cases driven to suicide defending the United States Capitol on January 6th. $5 million went to the family of Ashley Babbitt. 2 independent investigations found that the officer who fired was legally justified, acting lawfully to protect the chamber from a mob that had just broken through the doors. But that officer's name is not celebrated by MAGA. That officer's name is not on a check. The mob gets the money. The defenders get nothing. Sergeant Aram Gunnell came to this country and became a Capitol Police officer because, as a high school student visiting Washington for the first time, he saw what those officers did, and he said that would be his life's work. Size. He gave everything to that work. And on January 6th, a mob sent by the President of the United States broke his foot, destroyed his shoulder, and ended his career. He can barely walk. He can barely lift his arm. His family lives on a fraction of what he earned. And the Republican Congress, the one that spent this entire week talking about how much they love police, has given him nothing. Not a word, not a check, not even the plaque they are legally required by their own vote to hang in his honor. They couldn't pass that. But they passed 4 bills during Police Week, none of which fund a single officer, hire a single cop, or compensate a single wound. This is the Republican Party's relationship with law enforcement in 2026. Performative in public, predatory in practice. They wrap themselves in the badge when they need votes, and they abandon the officers when the bill comes due. While Trump's J6 pardons have produced at least 33 new criminal charges against released rioters, including a man now serving life in prison for child sexual assault, Republicans are busy protecting the bail bond industry and terminating the federal oversight of a sheriff's office caught systematically racially profiling Latinos. Raskin said it plainly. You cannot stand up here and talk about public safety while you are actively shielding the people who attacked public safety. He was right. The record is now permanent. And the people who voted against that compensation fund own that vote. This country deserves to know. Share this video. Make sure they know.